I just wanted to explain briefly a little bit about Father Myung's life, where he's coming from and where UPF is coming from, sort of background, and the different stages of development of our so-called unification movement. So we say a unification movement, so I like these two words. Movement implies something that's progressing and moving forward, not static. And unification, the idea of keeping our identity, but at the same time coming together, finding our common values, aims, and then working together to actually do something constructive, not just theology, theorizing, theoretical, but actually trying to do something practical for the benefit of all humanity. But keeping our identity, but at the same time coming together. So central to Reverend Myung's life, as I understand it, is the idea that we are brothers and sisters, and we are one family of humanity, and therefore, from his experience and understanding, there's something in our relationship with the divine, with the Creator, which Tim was talking about yesterday, in terms of kind of parent-child relationship. That all of the things that we see here at Cleve House and enjoy were created for our pleasure, in a sense, for our happiness. Rather like when you have your first child. I can remember when we had our first child. Tricia was expecting Teresa, and you just want to prepare everything. You want to prepare the room, the environment. You go over the top, maybe buying too many things to prepare. But it's that heart of the parent towards the child, and it's an inclusive heart. That was central to me when I first heard these ideas 40 odd years ago. That it's an inclusive heart. That you want everybody to be within the same embrace. You don't want anybody to be left out. It's really important to me. So where does that come from? Then there were three kind of phases in the development of our movement. The early ministry of, I'm not sure if there's a little bit missing here, but 1920 was when Father Myung was born, so almost 100 years ago. And the early part of his ministry and our movement was more religiously, even church focused, and then it developed onto the level of the family, and then finally expanded onto the global level with UPF right there, founded in 2005, although it had several incarnations before that resulted in the founding of UPF. So I'll just look at those briefly. How many of you have actually seen a copy of Father Myung's autobiography?
Yes, I want you.
Maybe we can try to get you one. It's good to read, to understand more about the background of where our movement and where he is coming from. So I've lived my life with just one thought. I wanted to bring about a world of peace, a world where there are no wars, and where all humankind lives in love. I imagine we can all identify with those sentiments. There's something inside of us that doesn't want to see conflict, doesn't want to see war. And when you turn on the news and look at the news, you don't want to see that. You don't want to see that. You want to imagine, however impossible it might seem, Jonathan, however impossible it might seem, you still want to see a world without all of this stuff. We still have that dream. It's somewhere deep inside each one of our hearts. So it was there inside Father Myung's heart, from his early experiences. He was born in what's now North Korea. Obviously North Korea has been a lot in the news in the last couple of years for different reasons. So he was born in North Korea, as was his wife. And at that time, Korea was under Japanese occupation. From 1905 until 1945, Korea was under Japanese dominion, and it was a very harsh regime, especially for people from Christian background, who were often tortured, some were sacrificed, if they wouldn't bow down to the emperor of Japan at that time. So he grew up under that kind of very hostile regime and saw a lot of suffering in his life. When he was 11, his parents converted to Christianity, coming from a more Buddhist, Confucian background. But he said I was increasingly troubled to see the wretched situation of the Korean people under Japan's tyrannical rule. So the people who are currently in North Korea that has persisted until today. They've been subject to a very despotic, difficult, harsh regime. But South Korea has had a different experience. But many of the people who came from the north to the south, as Patricia would tell you, she's had the experience of being in South Korea and being together with elderly people who were separated from their loved ones when Korea became divided. And even now today, they're hoping that this latest development will allow them perhaps to see the family that they haven't seen for 50, 60 years. You know, fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters. You can imagine the pain of that separation for the last however many years since the end of the Second World War. So that's one of the things that our UPF and our movement is focusing on, is the peaceful reconciliation of North and South Korea. If that can happen, it may happen, it may not, we're praying that it will, step by step, then that can be a model. I think it was it Jonathan was talking about, or Chris was talking about, can we see actual models of reconciliation that UPF has maybe contributed to, that we can then showcase and hopefully inspire the rest of the world. So just imagine if there is reconciliation between Israel and the Palestinians, or North Korea and South Korea, what effect, what impact that will have on the world. So those two areas were a key focus of Reverend Moon's life and work. North and South Korea from a more kind of political, external reality, but Israel, Palestine as a more religious, internal kind of conflict. If we can solve or move those things forward, it'll have a tremendous impact on the rest of the world. So 1935, when by Korean counting Reverend Moon was 16, by Western counting 15, he had a spiritual encounter on Easter morning with Jesus in prayer on a hillside in North Korea. And that had a profound impact on him. And subsequently then he felt some kind of commission and calling to try to figure out a path towards world peace that would build on the existing foundation of all the different religious traditions, particularly Christianity. So he spent the next 9-10 years searching through the Bible, religious scriptures, looking at history, trying to discover what is the essence of peace. What is the essence of the way to peace? And the result of those 9-10 years of searching became documented as the divine principle, or the principles of peace as we have been studying them. They emanated out of this experience and the next 9-10 years of searching, prayer. He would go to the bottom of society to talk to the homeless and the dispossessed and prostitutes and people at the very, who've really suffered. Even in his home was renowned as a place where people who were homeless or traveling through Korea could come and get a meal, and he would make sure that they were well fed. Even myself, actually, when I was growing up in this little village in Lincolnshire, my grandfather's shop in the village, which sold everything to everybody, was known as a place where people who were traveling, we used to call them gentlemen of the road at that time, or tramps, or people who were just nomadic, had a wandering lifestyle. They knew in our village there were arrows on the pavement that pointed to the shop that my father and his grandfather had. They knew that they could come there for a cup of tea and a slice of cake, and then could carry on their way. So that was Reverend Moon's home. It was renowned for that. So he grew up in that kind of environment. But when he tried to share his ideas with people, he met a lot of opposition. And throughout his life, he's met opposition. In 1944,
Yeah, that's correct.
he studied in Japan at Waseda University during the Second World War. But when he came back to Korea, he was arrested and suspected of being a communist by the Japanese authorities. And this is called the dancing crane torture. You're strung up with your arms behind your back from the ceiling and beaten. So he was suspected of being a communist. Later on, the communists would torture him, suspecting him of being a spy, an infiltrator into North Korea. So he had many experiences, very harsh experiences like that. 1946, just after the end of the Second World War, he felt, when Korea had already been divided, he felt called by God to go to North Korea. Because he felt that there were people in the North who were prepared to receive what he had to share. Particularly again from the, as I said, from the Christian Foundation. But he met with opposition there, both from the established churches and the communist authorities. And again, he was arrested, tortured, to the point where his body was just thrown out in a heap outside the prison, or the place where he'd been tortured, and his followers at that time found his body and somehow nursed him back to health. Then he was rearrested again for disturbing the peace and committed to a labor camp. And a labor camp in North Korea at that time meant that you were basically going to be worked to death. You were overworked, underfed, and the way out of that camp was in a black bag, a body bag. But somehow he managed to survive. The average survival time was 6 to 12 months. Somehow he figured out, if you read his autobiography, how to survive in that environment. He survived for 2 years and 8 months, almost 3 years, and he was liberated when UN forces invaded North Korea and invaded the Korean Peninsula and drove back the communist forces, but then they swept south again with support from Chinese military, and so all the Koreans then fled from the north to the south and ended up in a very small enclave around the port of Busan in the south. He spent 40 days after escaping, being liberated from prison, trying to find his followers, but it was just a complete basket case, a total disaster area. And in the end he just went south with the rest of humanity, with one follower and another one who had broken his leg, whom he either carried on his back or on a bicycle. And they eventually made it to South Korea and built the first conference center and retreat center on a hillside looking over the harbor of Busan. That was the first building made out of ration boxes and rocks. So that's, in a way, that experience in the North Korean concentration camp and this building in South Korea. That's the origins of UPF. That's where everything started from in terms of construction and building and outreach. But if you go to South Korea now, you just cannot imagine this kind of reality just 50, 60 years ago. Incredible to see. Anybody been to South Korea recently? Just incredible situation there.
Yeah,
but North Korea is still relatively, like this, in desperate need of financial and economic help and support. And 1954, then, if you remember the first diagram, then Reverend Moon never wanted to found a church as such, but he founded what was called HSAUWC, the Holy Spirit Association for the Unification of World Christianity, a very grand title, but his purpose was not to bring together Christianity in and of itself. It was to create a base whereby then he could reach out to the rest of the world and include, remember this term, inclusive, an inclusive vision which would harness the foundation of all faith traditions and work together for peace. So HSA existed for about 40 years, but then in the early 1990s there was a gradual transition onto the level of family. In 1991, I was talking with Chris about this yesterday, 1991-92, the Women's Federation for World Peace was founded. And Father Moon then spoke about the age of women, and there was a similar experience in the Rastafarian movement at that time, Chris was explaining. Father Moon's understanding was not in a feminist sense, but in men and women then really having equal status and working together for peace, bring more the aspect of compassion, forgiveness, and so on into the public square. And then the third phase, from the 90s, late 90s onwards, was more the IIFWP, Interreligious International Federation for World Peace, and its successor, UPF, in 2005. So we'll just look at some of the activities from that particular era. I'll try to just focus a little bit on interfaith and marriage and family, but every branch of the unification movement has a role to play, whether it's UPF or Family Federation or Women's Federation, many different organizations. It's impossible to try to talk about everything, so I'll just focus more on UPF and our activities for peace in interfaith, interreligious activities, and marriage and family. Also a little bit about humanitarian service. That's art and culture. In 1975, Father Myung founded a theological seminary, but the different religions were taught by adherents of those particular faith traditions. So there would be a Jewish rabbi teaching from the Torah. There would be Orthodox and Catholic theologians teaching about their particular faith tradition. Very unique establishment. I think Robin studied there, did you, Robin? And what year was that you went?
85 to 87.
Other educational establishments, there's a university in Korea, Sunmoon University, there's one in America, Bridgeport University. So education is a key component of, some of you will know, any of you came to hear Dr. Yakubi speak? Were you there, Jaya? We had an amazing lady came to our home a month ago from Afghanistan, Dr. Sakeni Yakubi, and her take on development is education, 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 or the denial of education for people, young people in Afghanistan. So, but our understanding of education is not just traditional education as we would understand it for mastery of science or humanities or English literature or whatever, but actually education should begin with education of the heart. And of course that begins in the family environment. And then education in norms of behavior, ethical behavior. And then finally, education as we would understand it traditionally, academic education. So we've had character education programs in different parts of the world. And I don't know if you've got the manual here or not, the character education. Do you have it with you?
I think it was there.
Okay, so just briefly in January of this year then, we convened an Africa Summit in Dakar in Senegal, and there were representatives from about 45 to 50 nations of Africa. Yeah, good. And this was co-hosted by the Senegalese government and UPF. So on the right there, you'll see outside of the main convention center in Dakar, the Senegalese flag, UPF, Senegal, UPF, Senegal, UPF. So this was an African summit on the Pan-African level, but hosted by our Peace Federation. This is Mrs. Moon and President Macky Sall. Somehow he was captivated by the ideas and the ethos and practice of UPF, and he helped us to convene this incredible summit. And there was representation there from, certainly at ministerial level, from all of these 45, 50 African nations. And there were 5 or 6 acting heads of state came, and many people who were interested in education. So I've just asked Patricia to go because we, the character education curriculum that we've developed over many years since the early 90s has universal application, and it can be contextualized in virtually any culture and particular social context anywhere in the world. So we presented this to all these ministers of education, people from all over Africa. The manual online slides, teacher training programs. It was just given to them as a gift that they could take back to their respective countries and consider if they'd like to use this. It's akin to what we were talking about yesterday, but it's not a prescriptive curriculum. It's one that allows young people to really think things through for themselves and gives them this grounding in heart and character education as the basis then for education of mastery of whatever field of study they'd like to go into. So every Minister of Education, every pedagogue, everybody who came could take this back with them to their different African nations, and they're studying it as we speak to see if they would like to use this in their particular education system in their schools. If you want to have a look at that afterwards. It's just stunning. It's so simple, but it's a very amazing thing that we could offer to them. And we'd like to introduce that into schools in this country, but actually it's not so simple. It's not so simple. But that was the summit that we held. So this is the level at which UPF is working now, on this Pan-African level. And at the same time, a lot of young people came to Senegal, and I spent a few days with them. And this is on a unique island called Gorée Island, which has a very sad, tragic history. It's where hundreds, thousands, possibly millions of people left, never to return, to go to the Caribbean, to South America as slaves. And there's a particular building here with a place called the Door of No Return. And in preparation for a special prayer and ceremony there, which Mrs. Myung conducted, the young people, especially from different parts of Europe, they laid a pathway on Gorée Island that led up to this symbol of the suffering of the people in Africa. And this building here is like a museum where this Door of No Return is. And Mrs. Moon and a number of African leaders and some of our members went there, and they did a special prayer for liberation and forgiveness from that tragic, terrible past. That's called the Door of No Return. And it's very difficult to go there, actually, and experience and feel the reality of this historical suffering. But Mrs. Moon actually thanked the young people who came from Europe for going there and preparing this pathway as an offering to the people of Gorée Island. And she said that their kind of offering was a little condition for some kind of forgiveness of the European historical reality. I can't describe to you exactly the feelings there, but it was a very poignant moment for our Peace Federation. Back at the conference, then I was given about 3 hours preparation. I wasn't there to be speaking or taking part in the program, but I was suddenly asked to give a presentation on character education. I had 3 or 4 hours to prepare. And I found myself with the Nigerian Minister of Education, State Minister of Education, the Deputy Minister of Education from Lesotho, and myself speaking about character education, and then being able to offer this to several hundred people to take back to their countries to consider.
We live such busy lives, I didn't even know that this worked.
This has also recently been translated, this curriculum, into Arabic, and it's now being assessed by several hundred schools Palestinian schools in Israel, Gaza and the West Bank. One of our colleagues, William Haynes, he worked with a pedagogue from the Middle East. This was translated into Arabic, and it's also being offered for consideration for young Palestinian people in their school system. So that's what we're doing. And offering this. One time we were in the Middle East, in Jerusalem, and there was this lovely priest called Father Abuna, who'd come from Nazareth and brought many people. And when he spoke publicly with UPF, he said, "We are doing the peace. Not
Yeah.
talking about the peace, but we're doing the peace."
Yeah, exactly.
And as you know, it's not a simple matter, but that's one thing I like about UPF. We get our hands dirty and we're trying to do the peace, not just talk about peace. Also, when I was in Senegal, then I had the incredible privilege of meeting Dr. Sakina Yakubi, and she was one of 2 recipients of a peace award that is presented now every year from our Peace Federation. She and an Italian surgeon who works in conflict zones received this award last year, and she came to Dakar, and I had the good fortune to meet her, had breakfast with her one morning, and she then agreed to come to speak in Birmingham 1 month ago. I just found out that she happened to be in Oxford for a conference in April, and I just said, "Would you please come to Birmingham to speak?" So she came, and she spoke in Birmingham a month ago, and she is literally a modern-day Mother Teresa.
It's wonderful. She's wonderful.
For me, no question, she's a modern-day Mother Teresa. Her heart towards young people and education, putting her life on the line. I feel so privileged to be able to associate with such people as this, a worthy winner of this Peace Prize.
From Afghanistan, yeah?
From Afghanistan.
What is your opinion?
So she, during the time of the Taliban rule, she went back from the comfort of America, where she'd grown up and received an education. She decided to go back to Afghanistan, and under the nose of the Taliban, if you know anything about their ruthless regime, she started to establish centers of education and eventually schools, which meant that she had to actually confront the Taliban several times. There were 4 or 5 key moments in her life when she was one time in a room with 9 young guys dressed in black beards, rifles, asking her, "What are you doing?" And she had to figure out what to say in that moment. And the pendulum of life could have gone this way or this way. And she pointed to the Holy Quran when they said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "That's the Holy Quran. I'm teaching from the Quran. I'm teaching your women how to be good mothers, how to be good wives, how to take care of themselves, how to be healthy." And somehow she managed to figure out in the moment, can you imagine in that moment, what to say such that these guys couldn't say anything. She heard them speaking in their language. They didn't know that she understood their language. She heard them say, "Actually, this is a good person," and they went away.
Very brave.
And she's gone back there now. And they all left, and left her. Everybody had just abandoned her. The security guard, the other people, they just run away.
She said, "I cannot leave. I cannot leave."
Hey!
Kitchen.
So we had her speak on Islamic Radio, Unity FM, and she spoke to a couple of hundred people in her home, and we want to invite her back again. But I asked everybody during the meeting, please pray for this lady.
Absolutely.
Keep her in your prayers. She's back there now in Afghanistan, still doing the same thing.
But the programs that she does is tremendously amazing.
During the course of conversation with her, we were just talking, and she said, "Yes, I suddenly realized that when you go to hospital, the hospitals weren't so great, so I decided to build a hospital." And she just built a hospital. She established a hospital. Just, apart from all the hundreds and hundreds of schools, she's impacted on 14, 15 million children's lives.
But also it's important how she left the position of, she was a professor in America.
But also how we get to know her, the prize.
Yeah.
That's good.
Robin was speaking, it's going on.
No, it's okay.
You can say.
You can say about the prize that UPF gave them.
The Peace Prize?
You have some photos.
That's how we get to know her.
Just the screen is slightly changed.
Wonky.
No, the projector moves.
Robin,
Really
please.
boring.
The whole
Robin, we have some slides of this.
I have something, yeah. On the first one is not
About 3 years ago, Mrs. Moon felt that we should offer a Peace Prize that hopefully will become as recognized as the Nobel Peace Prize, but with a spiritual, internal dimension to it. And so this was the second or third year?
Second.
I think second
year.
award,
Oh,
because it
you
was
forgot.
every 2 years.
So this was the second time that the award was given, and it was given to herself and, as I said, this Italian surgeon who's set up hospitals and worked in conflict zones, risking his life many times. So I feel if we are choosing people like that, then that reflects
doing right.
something about UPF that we're,
She was saying she felt so humbled
yeah.
to be chosen. She said, "Why me? And it's really such a great people to have that humility."
Mm.
We were so happy that
Oh,
they
she's
chose her.
fantastic.
Really, we were so happy.
She's fantastic. She's fantastic. She's awe-inspiring.
So interreligious cooperation, a lot of work for UPF in that area, particularly this religious youth service that I've been involved with to some extent, allowing harnessing the energy and the vision and dynamism of young people.
Coming together.
World Scripture, as you saw yesterday, that was 5 years in the making. From 1985, it took 5 years, and it was launched in 1990 at the Second Assembly of World Religions in San Francisco. Again, creating this advocacy, creating a platform where everybody is represented. You can, as a person of any faith, you can look at that book and feel good because your faith tradition is represented there. But we are all together in one place. So it's such a beautiful, holy book.
Oh,
Father Moon tried his best within the constraints of our movement to stop the Gulf War. Unfortunately, it wasn't possible.
Robin, it's Kristara, is it? Oh my God. You want that?
So you'll have heard a little bit yesterday, I think, about the Middle East Peace Initiative. So from 2003 to 2008 or so, we conducted many peace initiatives in Israel, the West Bank and Gaza. Again, trying to bring this presence of all faith traditions to do together what we weren't able to do or can't do separately. And I was describing to somebody yesterday, I think, the peace walk through Old Jerusalem, which in 2003, during the Second Intifada, was just a no-no. There was so much tension, suicide bombs were going off. And we started out in the Old City, and the Israeli security said, "You cannot do this," having several hundred people walking through the narrow streets of Old Jerusalem. But the rabbis came to the fore, the Jewish rabbis, and they negotiated with their own people, and somehow we were allowed to continue. And then we came to the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall, and we could all pray there together, Jews, Christians, Muslims. And then we walked up onto Temple Mount, and Al-Aqsa, the third most holy site of Islam, is on Temple Mount, together with the Dome of the Rock. And at that time, then the imams in our midst had discussed with the imams of Al-Aqsa, and we were allowed,
We went inside.
all of us, to go into Al-Aqsa. Men, women, Jews, Christians, Muslims.
It was amazing.
Some Jewish brothers and sisters were weeping because they'd never been on Temple Mount in their life before. It was an electrifying experience.
That's me. Oh my God, I'm very
This is
excited.
inside the third most holy site of Islam, after Mecca and Medina.
There's every single religion there.
Later on we weren't able to do this because tensions recurred again. But at that particular time, and the Imam who was speaking to us, Imam Bundakji, was just weeping.
I was crying. It's so amazing.
So that proved to me we can do together almost the impossible, what we can't do separately. And we took many interfaith groups from London, from Birmingham. There's a whole story behind that particular picture. That's actually looking out over the Sea of Galilee on the Mount of Beatitudes, where Jesus gave this famous Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the poor, blessed are the merciful, blessed are the pure in heart. Just one iconic moment in Birmingham was when our last, I think 3 years ago, we had our third Muslim Lord Mayor in Birmingham, Councillor Shafiq Shah. Every year you have a different Lord Mayor in Birmingham, it rotates. And at that time it was a Muslim Lord Mayor, and there was an event in the city centre to commemorate the forces who died in different wars. And you had the Bishop of Birmingham, decked out in his robes, standing next to the Mayor, Councillor Shafiq Shah, Muslim, and there was a reading from the Bible from the Sermon on the Mount that had to be given publicly. And who was doing the reading? Councillor Shafiq Shah, our Muslim brother, was doing the reading from the Bible, standing next to the iconic Bishop of Birmingham. It was such a poignant moment. That's one of the reasons I like Birmingham and doing the piece in the UK. Because you can do these kind of things. But Shafiq Shah was taking a risk to do that, actually.
Yeah.
He was taking a risk. So we have people who are prepared to take risks for peace. I think I said that here in this room last night in my prayer. Even to come here, maybe you are taking a risk to come here. We need people, we need statesmen and stateswomen who are prepared to take risks for peace, to buck the trend and go against what maybe popular opinion. But UPF tends to find those people and work together with those kind of people.
Yeah, it's true.
Gus Dur, that's his popular name, Abdurrahman Wahid, former president of Indonesia, he loved UPF. He said, Reverend Moon's call for peace through religion is something of great nuance and profundity. We're deeply fortunate for the chance to hear him and observe his lifelong struggle for world peace. He was quite unpopular in Indonesia because of his openness. Women's Federation. I'll just finish with humanitarian service and then come on to family. So in terms of service, we have a tremendous track record of service, particularly UPF and the Women's Federation. RYS, the Religious Youth Service, comes now under UPF. It began in 1985 as an idea, and then gradually certain momentum was built, and then thousands and thousands of young people have taken part in RYS projects, and it's had a multiplying effect because when they come together, they have such a strong experience, they feel, oh, I want to do this in my country, I want to do this back in my community. We've had that experience, haven't we, in Birmingham, in India. Same concept, come together, do something of public good, get empowerment, and then it has this multiplying effect. 1996 in inner city Birmingham, we did 3 projects.
There's Margaret.
See this young lady here,
I love that.
young man here. In 1996, it was the first time we'd done this project in Birmingham. I went to the city council and I said, can you help us with tools and gloves and so on? And they said to me, yes, we can give you, but how much can you give us? How much money can you give us to buy these things? Can you imagine? I went to Birmingham City Council. At that time there was money sloshing around, millions. No, it's a different story. And they said to me, how much money can you give us?
For what?
So I took a risk and I said, I'll give you £300. And I gave Birmingham City Council £300 for the gloves and work clothes and overalls and everything. The following year, we did another project, they gave me £3,000. They were so inspired to see what these young people could do in inner city Birmingham.
India.
And then as a result of that, we were invited to go to India by a Christian minister, and we ended up building a children's home for Dalit orphan children
It is.
in just outside Hyderabad in Andhra Pradesh in South India. So that's not a very clear picture. But the money that was raised, the seed money to build that home, came from Birmingham's temples, mosques, churches, gurdwaras, viharas, synagogues. It was holy money that built that project. To the point where when it came to the official opening in the year 2000, I couldn't speak. I had this government minister waiting to speak, and I was supposed to introduce him, and I couldn't speak. I was so full of emotion because of the holiness, the goodness, the collective goodness behind this project. Sports, could talk for a long time about that. Media. I'll just finish with the idea of blessing. So in 1960, Father and Mother Moon were blessed together in their own marriage. and from that time onwards have tried to encourage the idea of blessing, which is that both to try to protect and preserve the traditional value of marriage and family, but to invite God's blessing into our relationship and then be a vehicle for that blessing to be conveyed to our communities, to our society, that kind of idea. That it's not wrong to seek blessing, but we should be a conduit whereby it flows out to our children, our extended family, our community, our society, and beyond. The blessing is conducted with people of other faiths helping to co-officiate, representatives from different faith traditions who will offer prayers, bring their own followers and so on to take part. We've held a blessing in the UN, which is slightly controversial, but young people from all around the world came dressed in their traditional garb. One other idea which we haven't fully developed, which Reverend was very keen on, was that the collective voice of faith should be heard in the UN, or it should be there to advise national governments, or even on a city level to advise a local council. His idea was that the UN or governments are trying to do a good job, but there's a certain limitation to their thinking, especially short term. Governments tend to think more in terms of getting re-elected, or they're influenced by economic, we need to spend money on this or that. But the collective voice of faith ought to have an input, because in the faith traditions we still tend to think a little bit more preventatively and longer term, and that this kind of balance should be there. And I think we'll see that more and more in certain nations where we have we're trying to get more of a national foundation. In the UN. Yes.
Harmony Week, this kind of thing.
So in 2000, Father Myung tried to introduce the idea of an interreligious body within the construct of the UN, but it's very difficult actually to make that happen. But the UN has developed in a certain good direction, but Reverend Moon's idea was that there should be a constructive interaction between the body politic and the collective voice of faith.
Inshallah will happen.
So in London, Robin and Margaret, and in Birmingham, we've tried to conduct this blessing where we bring together couples from all different faith traditions, so that everybody is represented, and then to make both a personal and a public statement. Personally, couples take part to renew their commitment to each other and to the ideals of marriage and family within their particular tradition, but at the same time we're making a public statement that this is important for our society. And it's a very, always in my experience, a very moving occasion. We have people from all faiths, from local government and religious leaders, but also people at the bottom end of social status, refugees and asylum seekers. This time in 2017 we had 10 Syrian families take part in this blessing, who just arrived in Birmingham with virtually nothing, having paid an incredible price. It was so moving to have them present with us. And there was quite a substantial contingent there from a particular mosque in Birmingham that my wife is part of. She's fully integrated into the Clifton Road Mosque with many of these ladies. I think she was describing to some of you how her best friend Yasmin is part of that mosque, and you feel so at home. And finally, we try to have then public figures come and support our activities. So this is the Imam or Sheikh from that particular mosque, Sheikh Nuru. He's from Ghana originally. He was Sunni growing up, but then he converted to Shia Islam, and he went through a tremendous, torturous time rejected by his family and many of his friends, but he's very much an interfaith person. He loves the ethos and the values and style and way of working of UPF. So we're looking to work with him in the future. And this lady is the first black woman to become an Anglican priest in the UK, Reverend Eve Pitts. Do you remember when they began to ordain women in the Anglican Church? I don't know how many, 10 years ago or something? And she was the first black woman to become ordained as a priest in the UK, in the Anglican Church. Incredible lady, really radical.
She went to the parliament, you know, for the women affiliation.
She's spoken in the parliament
Yeah,
at our peace meetings. Amazing
So
lady.
powerful for the human rights of women back here.
So it's inspiring to be together with these kind of people, that they're working together with UPF, representing their different traditions. Not sure where these gentlemen, I think they're from Sikhism, is it?
That is
And the third one.
Isn't that a nice picture?
Yeah, lovely.
And last picture, then I spoke about this in Dakar, in Senegal, the impact that all of this work had on the education of our own children. So our children have grown up with these kind of activities, and hasn't been easy for them because of our public life. Often they'll come home from school or university and there'll be a meeting going on. They just want to put their feet up and watch TV and relax, chill out, but
They don't.
so it hasn't been easy for them. But the flip side of that is that they've grown up with every kind of person,
That's true.
and they're free, comparatively free to connect, both having encountered people of different cultures and faiths, but even unconsciously, they've grown up just being very familiar. So our eldest daughter, Teresa, who's about to become a GP, if you're a GP in Britain, you know how many minutes you've got with each patient?
10 minutes.
Maximum 10 minutes. It's actually 7 minutes and 3 minutes to write up all the paperwork. So if you've got 10 minutes with somebody that you don't know, and if you're struggling with that person because they're not
From your race.
from your particular religious background or so on, it can be a constraint. But our children, they're actually
They're prepared.
recognized for their freedom in that respect, and lack of concepts. So we're really grateful to UPF and all of our peace activities for that. This was a celebration in Roheath Pavilion in the Birmingham, when we invited a lot of our friends from different faiths. So we had a Hindu table and a Sikh table and
So funny.
different tables and an elderly people's table, and just had a wonderful
Young people.
celebration. So that's just a few things. So all of this is emanating out of what you saw in the first few slides. Father Moon's experience, through direct experience, through his prayer and intuitive understanding that actually we are one family, under one divine creator, but there are so many forces at work to prevent us from feeling that. So that the first impulse towards another person would be, oh, this person is Muslim because they're dressed like that, or they're Japanese because they look like that. But actually, ideally, our first impulse towards the other is a familial feeling.
Yes.
Is a brother, sister, parent. This could be my granddad. This could be my child. That should ideally be the first impulse.
Yeah.
And then everything else is important, but it's secondary to that impulse that we are one family of humanity. So that's another thing I like about UPF. We try to create the climate, the environment, the situation where we can feel that, as we're trying to do here this weekend. And then we treat each other differently. But all of those activities have a certain kind of value in and of themselves, but they're also trying to create these environments where people can come into that environment and feel this, and then take that back into their respective cultures and traditions and social groups, even into the workplace. And all of the activities that Father and Mother Moon founded are kind of geared towards that, trying to take this feeling into, or penetrate all the different aspects and areas of human endeavor whether it's fishing, industry, or the NHS, or whatever it is, to transform our culture to this, what they would call it the culture of heart.